So there's a lot of people I can't see in the Zendo. Um, and I feel like maybe we're a little bit of a mixed group this morning in terms of our basic sort of like exposure to practice. So the invitation has been to talk about one of the precepts, and it's the precept of non-stealing. Um, what I'd like to um, do is just kind of set up a little bit of some background so we're all a little bit on the same page. And we did have the ceremony this morning of the renewal of the vows. And I wanted to express my delight and appreciation. Some of the folks who have recently taken Jukai and formally taken those precepts as part of their practice were in attendance at the renewal ceremony. And I think that's really encouraging and hopefully supportive to all of us that we do that together. Um, because it really is largely, all of our practice really is largely a communal practice in terms of how we express our intentions of how we want to live. So I pulled out, Choa and I co-led the class, the Jukai class, so taking the precepts, started last summer, I feel like, and ended when we had that ceremony in the late fall. So I pulled out the our guidebook from that, and just kind of wanted to remind us of certain aspects. And again, I can't tell for sure if there's anybody in the Zendo who's brand new for the first time today. But I think one of the things that can be misunderstood about Zen is there are no moral guidelines. And we do have these precepts, which are, I loved this. I was rereading this stuff. It's like you could reread it over and over and over again, right? That the word kai is often translated as precept, but could be defined as aspects of our life. So the maybe moral guidelines feels kind of heavy, but and we're all well aware that we can use help in dealing with our own humanity, with dealing with what are called the three poisons, so greed, anger, and ignorance, that we deal with all the time. It's just part of being a human being. And I think one thing that's really helpful in considering the kai, or the aspects of life, is that they're not meant as a harsh bludgeon to ourselves, but really to look at it as, how do I support my intention of how I want to be in this life? And for all of us, we have to define that for ourselves, whether we're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, or whatever our orientation is. In some ways, that's kind of like all we really have, is how do I want to be in this life? So a couple of the things that were sort of generally in the Jukai book, or the Jukai handbook, were looking at non-harming and life affirming as primary guidelines in terms of how we practice with the Kai, with the aspects of life. And also, this is great, apply them to ourselves and not to others. So our focus isn't on passing judgment on how other people are doing their practice, but really retaining that attention to how am I functioning, how am I being, and pretty much I think we're often quite aware of when we fall short of that, of what our larger intentions are. And then just these three perspectives on the practicing of the precepts, which I think most of you know, but just again, just so we sort of have a common vocabulary just right now in this conversation, is there's the literal perspective. So there's just don't do it. And that's can be super helpful to pick up one of the precepts and go through the day and just not notice what happens with just not doing it. And then the relational perspective, and this is sort of where there can be a fair amount of, kind of criticism of everything is relative. But it's actually the relational places, that's really where we live most of the time, which is the timing, the amount, the position that you're in relative to someone else, and the placing. So, one really maybe could be stale at this point, but just an example I always remember hearing was as far as do not lie. And then if you were in Nazi occupied Germany at the time when the Nazis were in control and you were hiding a family of Jews in your basement, is that appropriate to literally take do not lie as what would be most helpful or avoid the most amount of suffering in the situation? Or is that a place where the relational kind of aspect of who am I, what is the timing, what is the place, and what's my position to it? So in some ways, the relational perspective puts just all the responsibility on us to really be very actively engaged with our lives and actively engaged with these aspects that we feel can support us being awake and attentive to what's happening. And so then if that's our aspiration, that I want to be as engaged and awake in this life as possible, then these are offered as helpful guidelines. What came to mind too, I was thinking about the 8 awarenesses of the enlightened person, I think reputedly to be the final teachings of the Buddha's life. And first is want little, and the second is know how to be satisfied. So this aspect of how am I how can I be satisfied kind of fits in with the precept we're going to talk about this morning. And then the third perspective, which really can be sort of the hardest to really grasp, is the intrinsic perspective. So the kind of more absolute view, which is basically everything is always whole and complete as it is, and empty of specificity, empty of fixedness. So there can be no way that we can break precepts because we're already inherently at one with the world. So the aspect of non-separation, and the hardest to me anyway, the hardest to really grasp the ungraspable. It's kind of natural, right? But in response to so the invitation was to talk about the precept of non-stealing, or do not steal. And so a couple things to say about that initially. One is I know my response in the beginning of the week, in kind of having the invitation to think about it and think about sharing about it, is that it feels like, oh, that one's easy. I don't go into the 7-Eleven and steal stuff, stick it in my pocket and walk out. Non-stealing, I got that one down. And so it was very interesting to just keep on reflecting through the week. What does that really mean? And there's some statements by different teachers about a couple that I felt were maybe most relevant, to made most sense to me. Being satisfied with what I have and not taking what's not freely given. And kind of the more it's first of all these precepts or kai or aspects of our life. This is not a brilliant reflection, just really did seem accurate to me. It just feels like one gem, and different facets are reflected at different times. So as soon as you pick up one, it's attached to everything else. And that really feels true. Because in reflecting on non-stealing, it's like so many other aspects came up. And one of the ways I was thinking about these 3 ways to look at it, these 3 perspectives, is that if we really come from the place, let's say this is the intrinsic perspective, where we really come from the place of whole and complete as I am, always, fundamental. So the non-gaining is a natural outgrowth. It feels like it naturally arises from this place of that I really am whole and complete as I am. And then the relational aspect is, how is that how am I not in touch with that feeling all the time? And what do I do with it when I'm not in touch with it? So a little story comes to mind from my experience yesterday. I was with a friend, and we were having to deal with something that was kind of uncomfortable, a little bit of a downer emotionally. And there was a lot going on inside me that related with the situation and didn't relate with the situation, but I was aware that I was kind of bogged down emotionally. And so I was holding it in myself, and also assuming that it would be a burden to this other person to actually let them know what was sort of in the background emotionally for me. And it finally just became too much. And I just, basically started crying and just said, this is what's going on in the background. This is what's running in the background for me. And I didn't want to bring it up to you because I think it would be disconcerting for you emotionally. So I was trying to protect you from that. And the person said to me, I really want to know what's going on with you. And I'm glad. Thank you for telling me what's really going on. And what came up for me in that kind of moment after that was, I was stealing their opportunity to show up for me by my own privacy that I didn't want to share, and my assumption that they weren't going to be able to be there for me. And there was an aspect of stealing their integrity, that they could show up for me. So it just feels like this is so subtle, this aspect of non-stealing. Another way it came up, I feel like really commonly in practice, is we want to steal other people's understanding. And somehow the image that came to mind was, I remember years ago at Zen Mountain Center, my Zumi Roshi would wear these black, not very particularly attractive, drugstore reading glasses. And I just noticed that all the teachers ended up with those same reading glasses. And there's a very natural way in which we emulate our teachers, and feel like if I put on the right clothes and I wear the right reading glasses and I walk the way they walk and I talk the way they walk, I'll be them. I'll have their understanding. And and that in a way, that's a form of stealing. That I want to put on somebody else's attributes to somehow make myself better or okay. And that feels like it comes back again to that aspect of really, really, really investigating our wholeness and completeness as we are, and all our doubts about that, and all our faith in that, and all the vacillation back and forth between that, so that we can be aware when there's greediness, when there's ignorance, when there's even anger that somebody has something that I wish I had, or I want, or I need, I feel like I need. So how do we even have a grounded place to evaluate what's stealing? Yeah, a few other things came to mind. One was being aware how we subtly manipulate others to get what we want, which can be a form of stealing attention, stealing affection, stealing time. And I think that, again, sort of come back to the beginning, I think it's super, super important not to use these things as ways to beat ourselves up and feel bad about ourselves. It's really a matter of refinement. That's all it is. And we can take satisfaction and appreciation of ourselves that we're this dedicated to wanting to live in the way that we want to live and have the intentions that we have, that we actually want to investigate these things. That's a really important aspect of kindness towards ourselves. So then it's like it's an open field, almost of play, in terms of how does this stuff manifest, and how do I work with it, and how do I work with it to fulfill my own aspiration and my own sense of how I want to live. And our practice is all about relieving suffering. So to put a head on top of a head of I should be better generally is going to cause us more suffering. But how do I refine? That's kind of an invitation. And then I think naturally it comes up for us that the sort of the antidote, in a way, to this working with stealing is gratitude. How do I really deeply appreciate just what I have and who I am and what this particular manifestation is? So cultivating a sense of contentment and appreciation. And then obviously generosity. I think one thing that comes up for me around generosity, and actually Susan and I talked about this last week, is reciprocity. And I was saying how important that is to me. Partly, I went through a period of time where my personal life felt so challenging that it was very hard for me to feel like I equally showed up for others in the way that they showed up for me. And so I felt like I had a debt around reciprocity. So as I felt better, it's been really important to me to feel like I give back. And Saison said, well, she felt like that can have a very transactional feeling. So that's obviously something to be careful about. But I think the way I kind of feel it and was thinking about it um, in the aspect of generosity is really being attentive to how I give back in ways that I have to stretch myself a little bit. So here's a really simple example. A friend of mine had dental surgery this week, and I was aware that she did, and the day it happened, I realized it too late in the evening to feel like it was comfortable to text her or call her. But I made a point of doing it the next day, and I knew there was a part of me that can be so lazy about stuff like that. Like, this person would show up for me in any way I asked her to, if she could. And to make that little bit of extra push myself to express that reciprocity and generosity back to her felt really good. To just call her the next morning and say, how are you doing? So the aspect of generosity and how can we cultivate satisfaction with what we have feels like a way to work with non-stealing. And I guess what came to mind was, Bernie's thing about working with the ingredients of your life. And, a really kind of ordinary expression of that is, when the food gets low in your fridge and you have to get creative about putting stuff together that you'd normally maybe compost or not deal with, just toss out, and really digging in to working with the ingredients that are here, and not being kind of opening up to how rich our lives are, how much has already been given, how much is full already, which is everything. And I'll just make a note that I listened to a talk by Ado Francis Carn from Olympic Zen Center about this precept. And if you're interested in a very global perspective, she really comes from, like a global economy, climate perspective. I encourage you to look up her talk. It's intense though, in terms of she's really bringing up how much we steal to survive, in terms of, no, not survive, how we choose to survive, but how much we use the resources of the world, how much historically colonialism has used the resources of both people and natural elements in a way of stealing. So she really emphasizes that side. And if you're up for that, check it out. I think I'm kind of, in a way, focused, this immediacy of awareness. That's what our practice is attention and awareness. So how do we practice non-stealing in our momentary experience? I think that's it from me for the moment. So I'll see if there's any comments